They don't look like me, they don't talk like me. My philosophy, as long as they ain't me. They don't dress like me, they ain't blessed like me. So it don't get blurred, sum it up into words.
Greetings, fellow philosophers. This video has come about through the combined and sometimes conflicting wills to power of 4 Deakin philosophy students, Luke, Oscar, Samir and myself. We will, each in turn, talk about some of Nietzsche's ideas contained in Chapter 2 of Beyond Good and Evil, titled The Free Spirit. First, Oscar will discuss Nietzsche's view on dogmatic moral philosophies, as well as the historical development of morality. This will be followed by Luke's discussion on Perspectivism, which will lead into Samir's account of the will to power. Then, near the end of the video, I will aim to draw these ideas together with my description of Nietzsche's free spirit, as well as concluding remarks.
Plato's construction of the pure spirit and the theory of forms has laid down the principles of goodness as transcendent ideas that are undeniably true in an unchanging reality. It is Plato's dogmatic set of principles concerning our souls and morals that Christianity itself has been developed upon. As Nietzsche states, Christianity itself is Platoism for the people. Due to the dogmatic nature of some philosophies, it leads them to be heavily defended, as they are proclaiming themselves to stand for the one and only true way, rather than one of many. It is this constant defense of these truths that lead the joyfulness of life to be replaced with a spirit of resentment, which Nietzsche warns will lead down a road of moral indignation and martyrdom. Nietzsche emphasizes that philosophers, new and old, must avoid martyrdom and making the ultimate sacrifice for truth, because like them and all who have come before, there is no way of being proven right. Dogmatic philosophies of morality are seen to control its followers in a similar way to slavery, by enforcing some form of spiritual discipline and cultivation. It's common for these philosophies to teach hatred towards the restraint-free way of life, and continues to label the actions of those who don't practice this abstinence as sinful. Religions often preach in return for taking on heavy burdens meaning abstinence from the central drives such as hunger, sex and vanity, they will in turn receive deliverance from evil. It is this teaching of resentment and the promise for deliverance that perpetuates and enforces the herds to take on this moral view. The historical development of the evaluations of an action is broken down into 3 main stages. The first being the youthful prehistoric or the pre-moral period, where the value or non-value of an action was derived from its consequences. This stage is not considered moral thinking, because the value that is placed on an action depends on how its consequences have directly affected you. The second stage is called the moral period, that is still present today, where the value of an action now lies in its origin. The origin of its action is found in the intention of the person who committed the action, where one is conscious during their actions and thus responsible for the values of their actions, because he who knows thyself is responsible for the value of the intention behind the action. The third stage is where the decisive value of an action lays not in the intention itself, but in what is precisely unintentional about it. Furthermore, it is this intention that would be similar to a sign or a symbol that requires interpretation. Nietzsche notes that the people who we entrust to interpret these symbols are those who are the most honest, subtlest, and most malicious. Due to the interpreter's high moral standard, it can be expected that the interpretation of the intention will be negative. Nietzsche hopes for a new stage, an extra moral stage, where the intentions of one's actions may in fact be judged negatively in the beginning, but then after an analysis of the intention and an introduction of the belief that all values are equal, where the value of the intention may stem from the natural drives of hunger, sex and vanity, or from the mind or the soul. After this analysis of an action, it may be possible that the value of the intention may now be valued as positively.
Nietzsche is famous for the argument that there are no facts, only interpretations. This is not to say that by using the word interpretation he means that a certain point of view is false, or that there is no underlying truth in the world. Instead, Nietzsche means that we cannot know ultimate truths or facts by using human constructs such as language and science, and that the world is essentially in chaos. So any order or purpose found in the world has been imposed on it by us. Science, for example, seems to resist acknowledging that it is an interpretation. This line of reasoning informs Nietzsche's notion of perspectivism, which suggests that as truth and knowledge is based on individual perspectives that are formed from different values and outlooks on life, there are no absolute truths, there are no facts. Therefore, there are only interpretations of truth, and as perspectivism is also an interpretation, it does not even require us to believe it is true, unlike dogmatism. Of course, this idea of perspectivism means that there are potentially an infinite number of perspectives, an infinite number of truths. Nietzsche argues that we simplify the world through language, science and reason in order to cope with the vast number of potential alternative perspectives, and then we falsify the world when we think we have discovered ultimate truths using these constructs. However, Nietzsche says we must be willing to leave questions unanswered and to understand that we cannot grasp everything, as any individual perspective naturally involves honing in on particular material and excluding others. So for example, a painter cannot paint everything that they see. They have to make certain choices about how to frame an image, what to leave in and out of that frame, and what style to use. Therefore, they create a fragmented and distinctive perspective using a certain approach. Naturally, perspectives are interlinked and entwined, but Nietzsche would argue that it is impossible to incorporate every different perspective into a single approach or understanding. To focus all perspectives on a single object, we would need terms that every perspective acknowledges, and this would put an end to perspectives altogether, or assume that one perspective is truer than the rest. But no particular point of view is privileged in perspectivism, because as Neitzsche says in his article, Who Are the Philosophers of the Future, quote, "A perspective that is best of all is not a perspective at all." Furthermore, because a unique, all-encompassing image of the world does not need to be agreed upon, it could be argued that more perspectives means greater knowledge. Perspectivism says that we must constantly re-evaluate and reinterpret what we think we know, and this ties back into Nietzsche's argument that everything we think we know is an interpretation. All of our attempts at knowledge are attempts to live certain kinds of lives within a certain way of thinking, within a certain paradigm. And so what Neitzsche argues that Nietzsche is suggesting is that what we believe to be true is usually what is of most use for us and ultimately what makes us feel most powerful.
Having exposited his case for perspectivism, Nietzsche follows on to contend that human action, although often described in altruistic terms, is in truth dictated by a will to power. According to Nietzsche, the epistemological scope of the human being is necessarily confined to interpretation. By interpretation, Nietzsche intends to say that our apprehension and judgment of the world is structured by an array of theoretical constructs. From these constructs, we ascribe value to the world and interact with it accordingly. For Nietzsche, the nature of our being in the world is that it is deeply rooted in our value constructs. In fact, we are so affected by them that they shape all of our engagement with the world. Upon pondering the deep ontological connectedness between the world and ourselves, he states, quote, "No one will then speak of a drive to knowledge in and for itself," end quote. Instead, he says, truth is sought really because it is more useful and productive of honor than the untrue. In other words, for Nietzsche, our interpretation of the world, although it may masquerade in benevolent and noble facades, in reality serves nothing but the purpose of effectuating our underlying will to power. The will to power, in all its manifestations, is the tugging force to our interpretation of the world, the force vis-à-vis which we comport ourselves, the essential feature of being, the will to moving towards something greater than itself, a kind of self-transcendence. This primal, perpetually recurring will of the will to power is for Nietzsche the exclusive impetus for the projection of our being and the guide to our variegated interpretations of the world.
Music is an expression of our inner creativity. I want to be free.
Nietzsche heralds the coming of a new breed of philosophers. They are named his free spirits, or philosophers of the future. A free spirit is a nonconformist, an independent thinker, a kind of punk philosopher. Nietzsche also portrays the free spirit as one who seeks solitude when he writes, "Every superior human being will instinctively aspire after a secret citadel where he is set free from the crowd." It seems free spirits tend to isolate themselves, maybe because they feel so different to the herd, it makes sense for them to avoid the paddock. A sudden appearance amongst the sheep would likely scare them, if not put the free spirit at risk of falling asleep counting them. Sheep can be boring, as you know. All intercourse is bad intercourse, except with one's equals. Nietzsche suggests that free spirits become what they are via the struggle of self-overcoming. This often transpires through the suffering of hardships and with the mastery of self that develops on the other side of this anguish. Nietzsche says, "What does not kill you makes you stronger." To sum up, a free spirit has released itself from the chains of moral absolutes that Oscar spoke of earlier. Free spirits are not dogmatists, nor would they ever allow themselves to be snared by that trap, for they are travelling down the road of Nietzsche's extra-moral stage. And thinking back to what Luke said, a free spirit will understand perspectivism. They are willing to constantly evaluate and then re-evaluate their own knowledge, question their own truths. They will acknowledge that their truth is just one of many possible truths that exist in the world. Previously, Samir spoke to us about the will to power as an essential feature of being. A Nietzschean philosopher of the future is, as everyone, driven by their will to power. The difference being, a free spirit would fully embrace their will to power, and they would be completely aware of this while doing so.
They don't look like me, they don't talk like me. My philosophy, as long as they ain't me. They don't dress like me, they ain't blessed like me. So it don't get blurred, sum it up into words.